What's your theory that you can't prove, but that you think might hold up if someone were to do some real legitimate research on it? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1, I believe there's a link between getting motion sick and being able to tell which way is up underwater in low visibility. Like the inner ear is more accurate in people who are prone to motion sickness. I noticed in an episode of Mythbusters, when Adam, super motion sick, was able to swim upwards every time when blindfolded and spun around underwater. But Jamie, Iron Gut, swam every which way. It's 2 data points, but I think there's something to be explored. Story 2. After hearing that MS has a viral origin, and that there's a cold virus that majorly increases the odds you become obese, I think we'll find out in the future that a ton of diseases have viral origins. Maybe it takes certain genetics to interact with the virus and create the issue, but I think we'll find out that viruses are a major deal. What society looks like after that, who knows, but it'll have a major impact. Story 3. T-Rex retained arms to bear brightly colored plumage and perform elaborate mating dances. It's not without precedent. Look up videos of the male ostrich's display, for instance, which makes heavy use of wings he sure ain't using for flying. But mostly, it just entertains me to imagine the undisputed ruler of the apex predators being all asterisk, flitter, 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 asterisk, asterisk, flutter, 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 asterisk. Am I not a beautiful butterfly? Story 4. The feds caught Luigi by spying on a large portion of Americans through the security cameras at self-checkouts. I think they were running AI searches for partial matches for his face, probably with the help of a Thiel company and definitely without search warrants, through the self-checkout camera of every store and restaurant in the Northeast. He was caught in a McDonald's IRC after using one of those kiosks. The woman who called the cops said that a customer in the restaurant told her that Luigi looked similar to the United shooter, and that is what prompted her to call in her tip. I think that customer was a Fed trying to construct a parallel narrative to explain how they identified him so quickly. Story 5. I believe that Earth has shifted, or global warming has made the seasons about 2 months off. Winter starts later and goes into spring. Summer is later and goes into fall. Everything is pushed back. Story 6. I think previous generations of adults and children with ADHD partly went undetected due to the prevalence of smoking and secondhand smoking, as well as the prevalence of amphetamines to treat weight loss and other things they'd never prescribe it for these days. I know some of it has to do with awareness, but nicotine does mask a lot of the effects of ADHD for a good deal of people, and we were all heavily exposed to it, Story 7. I think some pets can sense a stranger's hormones and recognize if they're a threat. I'm not referring to pets who have past traumas that affect their behavior. I mean the pets from stories like, normally my dog hates men, but she loves this guy, or I knew something was wrong, my cat always hated that person. There have been recorded cases of dogs who could smell cancer and Parkinson's, so I think the premise has merit. It's a difficult study to imagine. There are countless variables that could affect the results. Is the animal protective enough of its owner to care what a stranger's intent is in the first place? Are there some hormones that wouldn't be easily recognizable? Can we parse what responses are just part of a pet's personality rather than a response to external stimuli, etc.? TBH, I've just gotten a lot of compliments on how pets take a quick liking to me, and it would be cool to get peer-reviewed validation someday, lol. Story 8. The cat distribution system is real. At some point, anecdotal evidence adds up to be science, man. We have never once gone and gotten a cat. We have also never had less than 2. That is not a coincidence. Story 9. Toxoplasmosis played a big role in the development of our brains and human culture. There is already a decent amount of research on how it affects brain chemistry, primarily dopamine and serotonin, and some studies have found links between common cultural traits and the prevalence of people with toxoplasmosis. Story 10. Remember vaping-associated lung illness, Valley? Vaping was like the worst thing ever and people were dying. What happened to that? Suddenly there's no more Valley and the news stopped reporting illness and deaths related to Valley. Here's my theory on why it just went away. The likely cause of Valley was vitamin E acetate, an oily substance that was used in the unregulated market to adulterate vape juice, so it would have the right consistency after being diluted. Turns out, although totally safe to eat, it's not safe to inhale. But before anything could be done about the issue, the unregulated market realized vitamin E acetate was the thing killing everyone and decided to stop using it because they didn't want to be held responsible for causing mass death. They just wanted to save money on selling their illegal products, not poison their customers. And so it was a case of the illegal market self-regulating to avoid the risk of more serious charges. That's what I think happened anyway. Story 11. Urinary tract infections are deadly to older people and are much more dangerous than previously studied. I know too many elders who have been diagnosed with dementia, psychosis, and other disorders when the culprit was an out-of-control UTI. Story 12. Hypothesis. Left-handed people are more likely to have better analytical and problem-solving skills. Rationale. Whenever a left-handed person is taught a task, writing, throwing a ball, etc., they must dissect and reverse the task in their mind in order to replicate it. That lays the groundwork for analytical thinking from a young age. Supporting data. Left-handed people make up 10% of the total population, yet they account for 20% of Mensa, implying a potential correlation between left-handedness and some level of intelligence. Story 13. Here's the one I had that got me to post the question. I think the reason so many people read their horoscopes and find them oddly fitting and think their star sign describes their personality in some way is because it legitimately does, but that the cause of this is nothing to do with the arrangement of the planets and stars, and everything to do with the way where your birth falls in the calendar year has to do with the way you are socialized. How close is your birthday to major holidays in your culture? Do you start school this year or next year because you weren't old enough? Do you have your dawn of conscious memory in the winter or the summer? If the first years really do shape your personality as much as they say, then having all your significant first milestones at different times of year probably plays a big part in how you're raised, how you view the world, and how you view yourself. Story 14. So visualize this. In microbiology lab, we culture colonies of microorganisms in a petri dish. They are born, they propagate, and die within a time span. In a matter of hours, few days. That is their timeline, their lives. Now imagine this. If you look at the universe, it does look eerily similar to the colonies of microorganisms in a petri dish. Try really hard to visualize all those galaxies in one frame, and you will understand what I mean. And we are born, we propagate and die within our timeline. Years. This is our timeline. The way we define visualize time is different than what those microorganisms would envisage. So there might be higher organisms whom we can't perceive because we can't fathom their time or size, and for them we are the microorganisms in a petri dish. Story 15. Jennifer Lawrence played ball with Harvey Weinstein in order to further her career and secure a Best Actress Oscar win. She was 22 when Silver Linings Playbook, a Weinstein production, was made. He had tremendous influence over the Academy, making or breaking stars. When she won, she said, "Thank you to Harvey, you're my little rascal." She has said that he never did anything towards her. If she said he did and it wasn't true, he could sue her for defamation. Thus, they both have a reason to lie. I seriously cannot believe that Weinstein, who went after seemingly every actress on his radar, somehow left alone a 22-year bombshell like Lawrence, an up-and-coming stunner who got a part in a key film that secured her an Oscar win. Story 16. Internet obviously has lots of bots. Theory goes that bots actually go beyond the internet and permeate real life now. There are thousands of fake people with social security numbers, IDs, jobs, pictures, a whole life backed up by documentation, but in reality they don't exist at all and can be called upon for voting manipulation, financial fraud, money laundering, and social engineering. Story 17. I don't even know if this could even be proven or not, but I believe time travel is both impossible and inevitable. I don't know if I can explain this coherently, but basically, all time, past, present, and future, exists at the same time. Everything that has ever happened, that is currently happening, and that will ever happen is going on all at one time, similar to quantum superposition and the many worlds interpretation. All of these events exist in a state of probability until an observation collapses them down more or less into a single outcome or timeline. More so than that, time is in motion, shifting and reshaping itself across its own timeline. Things happen because time necessitates it to happen. I believe this is why big discoveries are suddenly found in the parking lot of a supermarket when we least expect them. Time required it to be found and rearranged itself to make this happen. It wasn't found because it was suddenly always there, the timeline updating itself based on ongoing events. History isn't fixed but is constantly rewritten in ways we don't or can't perceive because to us, it was always that way. Because of all of this, time travel is impossible. How can you accurately travel to a point that is both happening now and has already happened from a place that hasn't happened yet? At the same time, time travel is inevitable because the possibility inherently exists because we perceive time, Time travel could very well just be a perceptual shift instead of a physical destination, which means we may find a way to realign our perception to a different point in the universe. Time travelers wake up in a different moment, as if no time had passed for them at all. And because no time had passed for them, and this event was always going to happen, the time travelers are never the wiser about where they've come from, because the timeline will adjust to accommodate their presence in a different time and place. Story 18. TikTok's existence kind of proved it, but for years before it came out, I was convinced so many YouTube videos like 5-minute crafts or that weird craft genre, Facebook clickbait articles, long Snapchat stories from influencers were a psyop from other countries to constantly push major time wasters on social media and cut into American productivity. Story 19. That there's some kind of energy or waves exist yet to be discovered which makes a connection between two humans, or between human and universe, which causes some weird coincidences like sometimes close relatives knowing about death of someone close, or humming same songs at same time without listening, and many coincidences like this. One of the prime example of it can be manifestation to achieve something. Story 20. Mine is much lower stakes than a lot of these, but no matter what the venue, the city, the genre of music, or any other variable, at any concert you attend, someone will be wearing a Motorhead shirt and someone will be wearing a Johnny Cash shirt. If you only have 2 people at the show, one will have on a Johnny Cash shirt, the other will have a Motorhead. If one dude shows up, he'll be in a Johnny Cash t-shirt and a Motorhead hoodie. Story 21. ADHD is the normal human state of mind and evolved from the need to monitor many social and environmental conditions simultaneously. Wild animals, human enemies, potential food sources, the weather, in order to survive. The ability to focus on one thing for a long time is neurodivergent and is only considered normal now because of relatively recent changes in the kinds of skills that society values. A corollary of this is that when a society or civilization collapses, the people with ADHD are more likely to survive and thrive. Story 22. I've posted on this before, but I strongly believe it's very possible that if the man is heavily into drugs and alcohol when he gets a woman pregnant, even if the woman never uses drugs or alcohol during her pregnancy, that child could still have birth defects and other symptoms reminiscent of fetal alcohol syndrome or drugs. I've always wondered this. And while obviously I understand that there's a much greater risk of 9 months of constant alcohol and drug abuse would have a terrible effect, I still can't believe even if the lady, hopefully, doesn't use drugs or alcohol herself, the man's DNA wasn't damaged because of his drug abuse or alcoholism, and that never transferred into the baby. I know this is a sensitive topic, but I think it is necessary to study and understand for the health of that baby. Story 23. Earth is a galactic prison. We are surrounded by a void that will kill us if we leave. If you were to design the best type of permanent containment, it'd be one that was survivable and self-contained but inescapable without help from the outside. The prisoners wouldn't have the tools or the materials to escape within the jail. We are trapped on a clump of rocks and dirt that will feed and hydrate us, with a barrier of gases to keep the air that keeps us alive inside. Outside that barrier is a vacuum that will kill us instantly, that goes on longer than we can measure. Now we're trapped and we can't escape. Every single thing we do here is the equivalent of making toilet wine and heating up cup of noodles with a modified electrical plug. I still enjoy my life and strive to be good. But as species, I think we're here because we pissed someone or something off a long time ago, and they keep us here where we can only hurt each other. Story 24. Alcohol gets people pregnant. Like at the fertility clinic, one of the treatments on offer was a blood thinner to help thicken the uterine lining. Alcohol is a blood thinner. People who party hard have thicker uterus, maybe get knocked up more easily. Good luck getting alcohol approved as a fertility treatment, though. Story 25. The reason human intelligent life evolved on Earth is because of the asteroid strike that killed the dinosaurs. Without giant predators, mammals were able to evolve. This may also be somewhat of an answer to the Fermi paradox. If we do find intelligent life out there, they may have had a similar history where the previously dominant species was wiped out. Story 26. I'm desperately curious what humans could accomplish or become if we were immersed in something right after birth. Put us with wild animals. Teach us every language known. Put instruments in our hands right away and listen to music. Make us catch a football before we get to eat. Never move anywhere without skates on. Kid has to fish to eat and can't leave the water, etc., etc., etc. Even better if we can take talented individuals and breed them to put their kids in specific areas. Obviously insanely unethical and wouldn't want anyone to actually do this, but still curious. Story 27. The cost of everything is based on what people can just barely pay and will never go down without an exploding bubble. Houses, cars, food, and Disneyland. Just hear me out. Disneyland jacked up their prices to try and slow down traffic but keep profits up. It blew up in their faces and made it more desirable for people to go. Used houses are priced to a point where a married couple can just barely afford them and still be house poor. At least that's how our first house was. We buried ourselves in credit card debt trying to pay our mortgage, daycare, cars, and food. Thank God we are out of that and have things under control now, but young people are fucked in this country when it comes to housing and raising a family. Story 28. Thoughts have a subtle but very real impact on reality. Like not in the sense of the actions that follow or how it alters perceptions if those around you, though these are true as well, but in the sense that thoughts are chemicals and electrical currents, have mass however negligible, and could perhaps, if better understood literally, shape existence. Story 29. We see more people born with disabilities or suffering from emotional disorders when they are born during times of tragedy and stress. Reason 1. Mothers are more likely to medicate and/or use alcohol drugs while pregnant. Reason 2. Stress hormones negatively affect brain development. Reason 3. Less smiling, happy parents during formative years. Story 30. Hiccups are controllable. A middle school teacher told us that her husband swears you can will them away, and that day changed my hiccup life. I can get rid of them instantly. I am confident everyone can. Waste no more time drinking water upside down or eating spoonfuls of whatever. Simply will them away. Story 31. Switching to a propane-based refrigerant for residential HVAC in the United States is a horrible idea. Essentially placing a potential bomb right next to your house and another slightly smaller bomb right on top of your furnace, directly above the heat exchanger, yikes, literally inside the ductwork so that if it does explode, it will blast flames out of every single register connected to the trunk line. I don't think they thought this through. Story 32. The Texas Governor Greg Abbott ignored warning signs and went off the boardwalk at Yellowstone, which led to him being scalded by hot water from being too close. Okay, so hear me out. This happened in midsummer of 2016. He was severely burned. There was some speculation about how that happened. Later that year, Abbott finally came out and said he was burned by scalding water while taking a shower in a hotel in Jackson Hole. But I find that to be a really weird thing to have happened. First of all, while I'm sure there are hotels out there who set their water heating to the level that would require skin grafts, as Abbott required, it would be really weird and dangerous and unprofessional for the kind of hotel he stayed at to do that in a town that is entirely dependent on the millions of tourists that come through there. Also, the NPS reported there was a record number of people going off the boardwalks. People were ignoring warning signs, ignoring park personnel telling them to get TF out of range of the volcanic death machines, etc. There were a record number of injuries and deaths related to that. Having lived in Texas for a time during Abbott's unending terms, I always got the vibe that he was the kind of person who would either ignore what experts were telling him or assuming the rules didn't apply to him or badgering someone into letting him do something stupid. And my theory is he just doesn't want to admit what really happened while he was vacationing in Yellowstone. I did a FOIA request the following year for incident reports, but the NPS wanted me to significantly narrow down my parameters and I just got too lazy to do that. So I have no proof, but it could be gotten. Now I admit I could be wrong. It could really be a hotel heating water to dangerous levels, and I am biased because I loathe that man, but it will forever be a favorite of mine. Note, I know he's in a wheelchair, but I also know many of the boardwalks that haven't fallen into disrepair due to budget and staffing cuts are wheelchair accessible. Story 33. My theory is that despite having the entire internet at our fingertips, actually finding useful information has become harder. A few years ago, I could search for a tutorial on YouTube and instantly get tons of useful results. Now, I have to constantly tweak my wording just to filter out clickbait, AI-generated garbage, or completely unrelated videos. Feels like search engines and platforms are optimizing more for engagement than actual usefulness, and it's slowly making the internet worse. Story 34. That a woman's hormone cycle can extend to her family, husband and children. My wife has very pronounced hormone shifts. She's consulted many doctors and functional health providers over the years. But like clockwork, when her hormones shift, I notice a change in the way I feel and the way my children act. Story 35. The reason people seem so angry and uptight nowadays is because there's just not that much to actually be mad about. Sure, you can complain about things like the economy or politics or whatever, but realistically, most of us are living pretty comfortable lives. We wake up, work our 9 to 5, spend time with friends and families or hobbies or whatever, then do it all again the next day. Most of you are never going to worry about where your next meal or drink of water comes from. Most of you are never really going to worry about any major rights of yours being violated. Most of you are already settled down into your sort of friend group and aren't really going to experience too much drama or issues as an adult. For most people, life is pretty good, and so they look for things to be mad about. Because anger itself is addicting, it's exhilarating, it's like taking a stimulant, it pumps you up, it gets you going, and people love that feeling, even if they claim they don't. People like to be angry, and we live in a society now with not enough stuff to be angry about. So people are looking for any reason they can to justify their anger towards someone or something. Story 36. Either true singularities as a zero-dimensional point with absolutely zero volume cannot exist as the center of a black hole, since matter cannot be compressed into a volume of zero. It needs a space to occupy, or else it doesn't exist. Or if a true volumeless singularity were to be proven, it would also prove the influence of an unknown dimension that interacts in a way with the three spatial dimensions, that the effect is that the three spatial dimensions get folded together. Story 37. That intelligence agencies are far larger and more involved in our lives and events in society than almost anyone realizes. Every huge event has multiple aspects that make no sense altogether. The same people or families being involved in multiple tragic once-in-a-lifetime, if even events, almost like they are staged to be there. Story 38. That whole your brain turns off image processing and blinds you when you move your eyes thing is total bunk. Someday this will be in the heap with the tongue taste zone map. I can 100% still see during eye saccades. If you had a display that tracked my eyes and only displayed an image during rapid eye movement, I could tell you what it was. I'm also horrendously annoyed by half-bridge rectified LED flicker that other people claim they can't see, so there may be a correlation. Story 39. We're desperately trying to shutter any kind of immigrants in this country while also proposing creepy pregnancy registry bills in state senates, while the administration is vowing for cheap in vitro fertilization, while systematically rejecting the idea of any sort of birth control. I don't know if it means anything, but I'm drawing some weird-ass conclusions. Story 40. Time actually goes by faster and time goes on. I've thought this since I was a kid. I'm no physicist, so bear with me. If the universe is constantly expanding and the Milky Way, even though not significantly, then wouldn't that mean Earth's orbit around the sun is actually getting larger? Not sure how this relates to the Earth's rotation and days being longer, but maybe there's another factor in play. Or maybe it's as simple as time is relative and it feels like time is going by faster, therefore it is. Story 41. I think I'm accidentally stumbling upon some sort of fundamental building block of the universe, to be frank. There's 3 core points that I think relate, and they expand from there with varying levels of conjecture. The 3 core connections I think I've found: major and minor chords in music, in respect to 440 Hz and 432 Hz, as well as the concept of discordant notes, chords, have a direct correlation to visually appealing color palettes, in respect to the cones and rods that humans have. I think that both of those things also are related to the mathematical study of frequency and waveforms functions. My hypothesis is that by combining several distinct fields of study, we can get a glimpse at something very fundamental to our existence, specifically between resonant frequency, color theory, and music theory. Honestly, I've never really put this stuff to paper before and really tried to coalesce all the thoughts into something cohesive, but I'm going to really effing try. First, a little bit of contextual knowledge that I'm going to be using. Colors are just light that isn't absorbed, but reflected off a given surface. That resulting light can be measured in terms of frequency, amplitude, etc. That is, light can be measured as a wave function. And sounds in musical composition that are likable, or meaning not discordant or atonal, are generally complementary to one another in terms of how each individual note's wave function interacts with the others and itself. If I'm not mistaken, I could very well be, then I believe every material and set of complex materials known to man possesses a resonant frequency. Whether it is one that is achievable by humanity right now or not doesn't matter for the sake of my conjecture. So, some assumptions that I will begin with. I think there's a ratio that exists which can relate musical chords to likable color combinations. I think that both of these things can be described and related mathematically as wave functions. I think that humans have a resonant frequency, but that the medium by which we would be resonant is not sound but light. I think that the observer effect in quantum mechanics, if absolutely true, then does translate upwards in scale in ways we do not presently comprehend or calculate for. Everything after this is entirely what I guess at, and to be honest, I'm not too sure what that is. Is this somehow related to what Nikola Tesla was on about with 369? Am I just overly engaging with my particular set of pattern recognition skills? Is there actually something more to this that's less than grandiose but more than mundane? I do not know, and I do not also know of I am smart enough or will live long enough to ever figure out the answer, the my question, which can barely be put into words. I know that color theory postulates that the environment we exist in, and thus the colors that it's made up of, have a direct and tangible impact on our state of being, biomechanically. Something in us, humans, reacts at a biological level to just the coloration of our environments. I'm not very well versed in that area of study. I'm primarily a mechanic by trade. I know that in music theory, there's like a big thing about 440 hertz versus 432 hertz being the resting tone for middle C, I think. Might be misremembering some specifics on this topic. Either way, that stuff lead me into asking about sound waves in AP physics and trying to learn about harmonic and discordant frequencies, which made me go back to my choir teacher to ask about Baroque-era music composition. I know I need to explore more in this area, but it's just not my profession. Wonder if anyone else has stumbled across these correlations and explored if there's any causality there. I've been mulling this stuff over for around a decade, came up with the concepts in high school, hoping this one doesn't get lost and buried in the replies. Story 42. Toxic mold exposure from water-damaged buildings can be so potent it can cause cancers, neurodegenerative diseases, MS, dementia, Parkinson's, and chronic inflammation in the body. Disease results from genetic mutations or DNA damage and often needs a potent stimulus to activate it. Story 43. I believe humanity as a whole would be a lot nicer to each other if we removed the concept of religion completely. No strange imaginary friend telling you what can or can't do. No old man in robes threatening you with eternal damnation for not following the words of some ancient book. Story 44. Helicopter parents, specifically helicopter moms, are only overprotective because they're afraid of other moms seeing one tiny thing and then calling them neglectful. It's purely performative. It's like a mom competition of who can be the most protective, but it's teaching the kids to be afraid of everything. Story 45. Tea that comes in bags is a carcinogen. The bags that a lot of companies use have plastic in them, and you leave them in hot water for a prolonged amount of time. You wouldn't use other plastic items like plastic cups or cutlery when eating hot food or drinks, but you will for tea. I knew a lady who didn't even have a microwave but drank a lot of tea, and my grandma lived her life with health as the focus and drank a lot of tea, and both of them got cancer. I know correlation isn't causation, and it was probably something else, but it's still weird it happened twice. Story 46. The current push to return to the office is 100% about restoring the values of commercial office buildings. Banks get like 30% of their revenue from commercial real estate mortgage loans. If companies start realizing they don't need a $500 million building, the billionaires who bought the presidency won't add another zero to their portfolio this year. Story 47. I think the uptick in adult ADHD diagnosis is actually CPTSD from the pandemic. Symptoms and signs are very similar. The isolation, the social media addiction, working through your own trauma with deaths of family members, feeling like Groundhog's Day, etc., 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 to then wake up one day and you're thrusted back into normal. But nothing feels normal, and hasn't since, nor will it ever. But it's much easier for medical professionals to throw meds at us to fix the symptoms rather than fix the problem causing the symptoms. Story 48. I'm almost certain, completely anecdotal, that folks with lighter-colored eyes, say blue, are more sensitive to onion vapors. If I don't catch it fast enough and chopped onion vapors sneak up on I will cry for quite a few minutes, and the sting will be unbearable. Maybe related, I got snow blindness once. Didn't wear sunglasses out with a friend who was driving on a bright sunny day. It took me about 20 minutes in a dark walk-in to regain my sight. Story 49. I believe there's an incredibly faster way for us to depart planes. What slows it up? People getting up and getting their bags while the whole aisle ahead of them is clear. The answer? Everyone in the aisle seat stands, retrieves their bag, gets off. As the aisle clears, the middle seat passengers stand and retrieve their bag from the back, forward. They do not progress forward. They let the middle seat person in front of them get up and retrieve their bag, and so on. Obviously, this could only actually happen in Japan, but I can't help but think of it every time I see the inefficient chaos upon landing. Story 50. That if time travel is possible in the future, the people able to travel go back to see the loved ones who are no longer in their lives. This is the reason we don't see them at famous world events. The emotional pull of seeing their lost parents/children, friends/pets one more time is far greater than the intellectual pull of watching the pyramids get built or meeting Shakespeare. Story 51. I believe aliens exist, but I wonder if we have a few billion years head start on most of them. It seems a lot easier to imagine a race with advanced technology rather than cavemen or little creatures without language on other planets. We might actually be the most advanced beings for an incredibly large distance, and we are just not quite at the stage to go look at other faraway worlds yet. It might be pretty lonely out there for us in 500 years. Story 52. I think most people have some form of COVID. After effect could be tiredness, maybe brain fog on occasion. A common impact is dramatically reduced ability to consume alcohol. I talk to lots of people who just randomly mention that small amounts now give them a hangover feeling. They chalk it up to age, but older people used to drink without issues. I think the government doesn't want to do studies because it would show that they fucked up their response and a lot of people in the process, and insurance wouldn't be able to afford all of the disabilities that people would be eligible for in the more extreme cases. Story 53, Pulse Theory. The concept that the universe is expanding up to a point where gravity such as black holes start winning and reversing it, where the universe is starting to shrink again. At that point, it would shrink to a point of imploding as all mass and gravity collides together, creating a massive explosion again, becoming bigger than the previous. This would become stronger and stronger, and because it takes billions of years per cycle, it's not possible to grasp currently. It would explain the Big Bang, just not as a start point, but as the last bang that happened, and many cycles have done before. I just feel everything in the universe becomes as diverse, big and logical because it has cycles. So in that theory, I would theorize that the universe itself is a cycle too, not a big bang as a single start, and the universe expanding as a linear flow. Story 54. I mean, it's a real theory that is being worked on, and way more advanced than my schooling, but I'll try and explain it. The oscillating universe theory. We know that the universe is expanding, and we can also see that the speed at which the universe is expanding is increasing over time. The oscillating universe theory states that this process is actually a wave that we are at the start of, and that eventually the expansion of the universe will stop, at which point gravity will start pulling it back together, and eventually it will return to a state similar to what it was before the Big Bang. I believe in this theory because most of our universe works on waves, light, gravity, quantum mechanics, all of it is waves. So why wouldn't the creation and destruction of the universe not be the same, just on a larger scale? Story 55. I think it's not a coincidence that so many men get a midlife crisis right before the menopause of their wives, which then leads to divorce, which then leads to them finding a young woman with the disposition to be into older men. I'm sure it's a mechanism formed by evolution which enables more offspring. Story 56. Social media apps like TikTok, worst offender, use more than your text and apps data farming to create your algorithm. It uses biofeedback and monitors microphones of your devices to scan for trigger words. I live in a completely isolated state in quiet, and when I do have brief outside interactions, my FYP is responsive. Once I had my phone turned off and in the freezer, I overheated it and forgot about it overnight. The next morning, I made almond milk and struggled to squeeze the bag. I remember thinking, oh, this is frustrating in my head. I sat back down, and after the phone thawed and turned it back on, my first video upon opening TikTok was about making almond milk and the easiest squeeze method. I never had that thought out loud. I never typed it. I never told anyone I was doing it. I think the elite wealthy have access to information about the human mind that we don't have, and they use it to manipulate us with apps. That's the least crazy way I can put it. It's not fun coincidence when your FYP is 2 FYP. It's because it's snooping on parts of your life you think it isn't. Story 57. Most animals are far more emotionally, socially, and intellectually complex than we give them credit for, and that many traits we attribute to rote instinct may function more similarly to our own behaviors than we give them credit for. My reasoning is simple. Every time science has a new revelation about a particular animal's behavior, we learn that they're more intelligent than we thought, not less. Story 58. There's something big missing in our understanding of how wave functions collapse. I only have a BSc in physics, but I've watched a lot of big-time physicists talk about it, and their opinions are all over the place. Does looking at it collapse it? How? That's totally weird, almost to the point of not making any sense. Story 59. I'm seeing an abundance of newer accounts on various social media sites that make wildly popular posts about the current political nonsense. I'm half certain some or most are either bots/AI trying to collect data on habits/opinions from non-conservative leaning users. It keeps me up at night. Story 60. Your body does an inventory of minerals and nutrients it gets when you eat something. When a pregnant woman screams at you that she needs vanilla ice cream with pickles and chocolate sauce, her body and the baby need whatever she remembers getting from those foods in previous meals. Personal experience. Wife hated the smell of McDonald's after working there for 3 years as a teen. Almost grabbed the wheel from me as we needed to get her some of those salty fries now. Story 61. The human race is getting stupider. It's the idiocracy theory, basically. Natural selection, which has shaped the development of the human race for millions of years, has been all but eliminated. Ultimately, this will lead to a human-caused mass extinction event at some point. When I was younger, I used to think this was part of some far-off, distant future. Nowadays, I would not be surprised if I'm still around to see it. Story 62. I think many of the weird medical issue Americans have faced the last few generations can be traced back to permanent damage from chemical weapon exposure their parents experienced during wars. I'd wager war veterans in general have less healthy offspring. Sometimes we'll see coverage for the veterans, and that's always its own fight. But almost never is there a study or a discussion of the genetic legacy or long-term damage that may be felt in their children or grandchildren even decades later. I bet if they did a study and really dug into the numbers, none of us would be surprised at the results. But they won't, because then the kids could sue the government for compensation for their provably damaged health. Story 63. In the past few years, Silicon Valley has undergone a change in the control of financial influence and power throughout the technology sector. What was branded as liberal, or neoliberal more specially, is now becoming libertarian, even neo-feudal. Peter Thiel caused a bank run on Silicon Valley Bank and helped trigger the failure. This was a catalyst for a bigger transformation that moved tech startups and their credit lines to new banks recently created by the alt-right/libertarian/neo-feudal adjacent schools of thought. Many companies moved over to use Brex, a bank venture backed by Peter Thiel's. They are moving fast and breaking things. This phrase is very important. They use this at tech startups to make it seem like adhering to standards of process is an antiquated idea, that shortcuts and MVP, minimum viable products, are the future, and when all else fails, claw back any and all value by kneecapping the product if necessary. Story 64, that the answer to all our questions lies within the subconscious, and the only way to access that is through the unconscious, dreams. The conscious is just a maintenance state for the body. I see the 3 states as conscious. For the overall maintenance of the system, unconscious is the IDE, for the creation of controls for the subconscious. And the subconscious is the BIOS. By learning the programming language of us, access to the deeper functions of the subconscious should allow reality to be better understood. As an example, I believe from all that I have read that the reason we don't actually see reality is because the brain filters out most of the information, so we see only what our brain wants us to see. Researching the connection between the unconscious and subconscious would, I believe, reveal the answers to questions we will never find outwardly. The biggest problem. Story 65. Imagine a near critically dense Dyson sphere nearly 50 billion light-years across, that different parts of it can never communicate because space is expanding faster than light can travel. The space inside the sphere still wants to expand, but the ultra-dense walls of the sphere hold their shape and resist that expansion. The wall's gravity is so immense that they slow the expansion of the universe. Now the center of the sphere does not know about the edges of the sphere because it's larger than the Schwarzschild radius, so the space inside of the sphere will continue to expand. Does the space-time build up pressure? Does space-time start warping? If there was a hole in the Dyson sphere, would space-time leak out of the hole? Story 66. I think that what we call the universe is just one collection of matter amongst other collections of matter. I think of truly infinite space and how our Big Bang happened because a tipping point was met. If space is infinite, it should hold up that there would be other collections of matter, other Big Bangs, or not. In my mind, this also accounts for the imbalance between matter and antimatter. All that exists is not exclusive to our universe. In my mind, I think of this as a big room with different expanding and contracting bubbles in it, each bubble being a different universe. Just something that I've thought about for a number of years now. Story 67. I've got an absolutely batshit crazy one, but it's not possible to test, at least not with the technology we could ever hope to have as a species. It concerns a theoretical, likely impossible situation where time travel could be made possible. We all know it's not possible to travel in time. Time is just a construct we've established. But do you know what might be possible? An infinite universe and an infinite time scale. If those things are truly infinite, then it might be possible for infinite possibilities. So if you extrapolate that thought, if you traveled in space far enough and fast enough, you might witness any possibility you can conjure, including mirror worlds of the past and future. For example, you might be able to find a planet very much like Earth, Maybe one with people on it, maybe even one with the exact same people on it as ours, an exact mirror world of the here and now. Possibly, there could be another Earth out there with the same history as happened plus or minus the time you want to travel to. You don't need parallel universes like in Marvel films, you just need an infinitely large universe with infinite time and a way to locate and travel to these places within a lifetime. Boom, time travel! Story 68. That hiccups have a purpose: to prevent choking. I one time ignored incoming hiccups and kept eating a hot dog. The feeling of needing to hiccup turned into not being able to breathe, and I was full on choking. I think hiccups is the body's way of telling us to slow the down when eating so we don't choke, and the rapid spasm of the diaphragm is akin to what happens during the Heimlich maneuver. Story 69. People underestimate disease due to media. For the vast majority of human history, infectious disease was a major killer and often disabler. Smallpox, polio, tuberculosis, even leprosy were all constantly present. Measles and mumps were child killers. This is why, even though the Cutter incident happened, the fact that the government cracked down on making sure vaccines were safe helped reassure parents who were desperate for the polio vaccine. Now, most people were born after widespread vaccination and antibiotics existed. They don't have the personal connection of knowing people who have kids who died before the age of 5 due to disease. Combine that with the fact that the way most people know about the past is historical media, and unless it's about a plague, a lot of historical fiction and realistic fantasy does not really include disease. Instead of having poxmarks, characters will probably have Hollywood beauty. There are a lot of action/war movies, and they will show the violence killing, even in scenarios/historical wars where disease was the main killer. It creates a warped view of the past and causes people to think disease was NBD. Story 70. The Chinese factory making paint for the brand Marie's Masters was the same factory making the paint for the brand Winsor & Newton. I bought an alizarin crimson from Marie's Masters, which had the pigment code PR206. Every other watercolor paint brand used PR206 to make a maroon, very deep brownish red. Only Marie's Masters and W&N seemed to use it to make a luminous rosy version of alizarin crimson permanent. At around the time W&N announced they were changing the pigment used for their alizarin crimson permanent, Marie's Masters also started phasing out the use of PR206. Not a particularly useful observation or theory, but at least it's my own. Story 71. There's a diabetes between type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is where the pancreas cannot produce insulin because its cells are being attacked by the immune system. Type 2 is where the pancreas has stopped producing insulin due to fatigue. Appreciate that's oversimplified. I believe that there's possibly a diabetes between the two, where the pancreas is being attacked but not quite enough to stop it producing insulin, but enough that its function is impaired. I have an autoimmune condition and have always had terrible trouble with sugar cravings. They have never responded to anything other than GLP-1 medications. There is an overlap in medications with rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes. Some medications can treat both of these things. There is a strong link between having an AI condition and developing diabetes. The chances of developing diabetes with RA increases by 50%. Having struggled with these unnatural cravings all my life, I am convinced that this is diabetes in some form. It is nice that recent medications free me from these cravings and give me a chance at feeling normal. I'd love to research this because I think there is a lot of uncover here and may even uncover more information about dopamine and addictions. Story 72. That the fluid surrounding the baby whilst pregnant must taste like vegetable broth. I did a bunch of Googling once out of curiosity, and that was my best guess at the end. To my knowledge, no one's actually tested this. Also that vampires might drink blood based on nutritional value, like humans in food. Different types can have different levels of different values. So what if one blood type isn't as nutritious but it tastes delectable, and vice versa? With the amount of iron in period blood, would it be similar to a protein bar? Story 73. The housewives of the mid-century in America were mostly a product of amphetamines and barbiturates being widely prescribed. There were definitely the cases where no drugs were needed, but I think drugs were very responsible for both the silhouette of the time and the cleanliness of the home. I've heard a few stories where this was definitely the case. I know depression was up at the time, and one of the main treatment was amphetamines, and it was a heck of a lot easier to get a hold of them. And speaking as a stay-at-home mom with ADHD, it's a heck of a lot easier when I'm medicated.